Hi guys, it's Tamara. I am back with another video. We're going to continue our conversation on trauma. And so I want to talk a little bit about failed suicide attempts. All right, so we're just going to jump in. Thank you so much for those of you who are subscribed to my channel. I welcome you back. And for those who are not subscribed, I encourage you to hit the subscribe button so you can stick around with us as we talk about trauma for the next 4 weeks. We've been talking a lot about trauma this month and last month. And so I want to talk a little bit about failed suicide attempts and kind of help you clarify some questions that you might have about that. There's a lot of people who struggle with suicidal thoughts, believe it or not. And, it's something that isn't easy for families to talk about. Sadly, conversations only happen after the fact, not before it. So I want to give you some information on what those failed suicide attempts can result in. And so we're going to talk about those 5 things, all right? So let's go ahead and jump in. The benefits for you today in this video is that you're going to learn 5 things that typically happens after someone attempts suicide. We're also going to zone in a little bit to what surrounds the topic of failed suicide attempts, all right? So I want to clarify some things because there's a lot of people who have emailed me recently and they've been asking me about suicide and some of the terms and some of the definitions. So I'm going to put them right over here for you because I think they're important to know. So let me just go through the 3 most important ones. The first is suicidal ideation. Suicidal ideation is basically thoughts of suicide. It's thoughts of wanting to kill yourself. It's thoughts of, what life is going to be like on the other side. Sometimes it's also planning and kind of being mindful of, some of the things that you're going to have to do before you actually take your life. Suicidal ideations really are the precursor to the attempt. So when someone has a suicidal thought, it's very important to zone in on that and figure out where they are, figure out how to help them, and really look at getting them treatment if possible. All right. So we have suicidal ideations. The second one is non-suicidal self-injury. The whole idea behind that is that you're not suicidal, but you are engaging in cutting, you are engaging in burning, you are engaging in scratching yourself until you bleed. Non-suicidal self-injury typically involves an individual who may have cut themselves really deep and may have had to be hospitalized because of that, but they weren't trying to kill themselves. There's typically cases where individuals have accidentally killed themselves, or they may have accidentally cut too deep, thinking that they are experts in cutting. They figured, well, if I cut around this valve, if I cut around this vessel, if I cut around this area, I'm not going to get hurt. And sometimes, one little small cut too close to a vein can land somebody in the hospital. So that's non-suicidal self-injury. The next one is a suicidal thought that is passive. All right. So a passive suicidal thought is a thought such as, or a statement that I would be better off dead, or I wonder what life is going to be like when I finally die. Or you might hear older people say things like, I can't wait to see my husband on the other side. Right. Or they might say something like, this life is not for me. I'm just waiting on my time. Right. Those are passive death wishes, and they're not always disturbing, and they don't always have to be something that you act on or something that you say, oh my God, this person needs to go to the hospital. But it is something to kind of keep stored in the back of your mind that, oh, okay, this person may be thinking suicide in some fashion. All right. So there are some places in the nation, in the United States, that basically assists in suicides. And one popular place and one popular bridge is known as the Golden Bridge, all right? The Golden Gate Bridge, I should call it. The Golden Gate Bridge is the big red bridge that I'm sure you've seen multiple times on TV. Maybe you've seen it in person. And if you know the show Full House, at the beginning of the intro, they always showed that like huge red bridge in San Diego, and or San Francisco, I'm sorry. And it's really kind of like a popular landmark, right? But it's also a landmark of suicide. And about 4,200 feet long is what this bridge is, all right? 3,000 people since it was first built have jumped off that bridge to their death. I'm going to put in the description box below a video of a young man who attempted suicide on that bridge, and he didn't succeed, right? It didn't happen. It wasn't a successful suicide attempt. And he talks about that. And he talks about the grief that happens after. He talks about the fear that happens after. He talks about all of that stuff. So I'm going to put that in the description box below, so that you guys can watch that video and kind of get some information from that as well. But the San Francisco, this Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, it has assisted 3,000 people in suicides. Because of that, there's been a lot of talk over the years about adding what's called a suicide net or a safety net, so that if somebody jumps, they're going to get caught in that net as opposed to hitting that water, and losing consciousness. So there's been a lot of talk about that bridge because it has assisted in suicides for years. And people still to this day go to that bridge with suicidal thoughts in an attempt to jump. So, it is a $35 million landmark that has assisted in so many people's suicides. And so I actually had a client one time that tried it on that bridge, and she suffered with grief. So I want to go ahead and jump in to keep this video short for you. I want to jump into the 5 things that I think happens to individuals who have attempted suicide in any format. All right. So the first thing is the number one thing that I want you to keep in mind is that people who have attempted suicide and they have had to go to the hospital as a result, or they've been placed on medication, or they are being followed by a therapist, whatever the case may be, a first attempt is always a predictor of the second attempt. Okay, research suggests that if you attempt it one time, the chances of you attempting it again is high. Okay, so if you have a loved one, if you have a friend who has attempted suicide, just know that there is a strong possibility that they could try to attempt it again, whether that's directly after, whether that's after they get released from the hospital, whether that's years later after a traumatic or very frightening thing has happened. Whatever the case may be, a first attempt is always a predictor of the second attempt. Okay, there's often for some people a period of grief. And I'm going to put an article in the description box below for you as well, so that you can kind of research this and get a little bit of background and some ideas about this. But there's often a period of grief after a suicide attempt has been failed. Okay, the grief is not always because the death didn't occur. Sometimes it's because there's now medical challenges. Because let's say, for example, you jump off the Golden Gate Bridge, and you hit the water, you lose consciousness, but you live. Well, in a situation like that, you might suffer a concussion. You might suffer a leg injury. You may have to get your leg or your arm amputated. You might suffer traumatic brain damage. You could suffer a host of things, right? In that situation, you might get an individual who starts to feel depressed about it, right? Because now there's medical challenges they have to deal with, and now there's surgeries, and it's like it compounds the desire to already want to die, okay? There may also be a variety of existential questions of why. I call it existential discomfort. It's the mental and psychological state and the emotional state of asking why and not getting an answer. So someone who had a failed suicide attempt may begin to ask why. Why didn't it work? Why do I have to live? Why am I still here? Why am I in the hospital? Why? And all of those whys can create a loop, an obsessive loop in one's mind and in one's emotions, and that can lead to another suicide attempt or grief. Okay, there's also very poor emotional stability. That's why they wanted to attempt suicide in the first place. They didn't feel that they could cope. And so some people deal with that after a failed suicide attempt. They still feel that they don't have the capabilities to cope. Sometimes they are treated in hospital, they're given medication, and then they're pushed out the door, but they're not ready yet. And so that failed suicide attempt is still in their psyche. It's still in their subconscious. They sometimes feel like failures. They sometimes, feel like they've lost something major, which is control and power and agency, right? And so some individuals remain unstable after a failed suicide attempt, and intense supervision is you utopia for these kind of individuals, all right? All right, the next one, number 3, is a lifelong handicap. Some individuals experience grief and loss, trauma, hate, anger, resentment towards God, because not only did their suicide attempt fail, but it also resulted in medical challenges that now they have to get treated for. And some people lose their sight, some people lose a limb, some people lose their ability to think clearly, and so it's like a double whammy, right? It's so heartbreaking. The fourth thing is that some people are impulsive when it comes to suicidal acts, right? Some people are glad that they didn't succeed. In the video in the description box, you'll see that the young man says, I'm glad it didn't work, and there are some people, when they have had a failed suicide attempt, they start to internalize feelings of failure, right? They start to internalize feelings of low self-esteem, that why couldn't I make this work? What did I do wrong? I know it was impulsive and I'm glad it didn't work, but why was I so stupid to even try it? Those kind of things can go through the individual's mind. I had a client years ago who experienced that. She attempted suicide before she came to me for treatment, and she had come to me for counseling because she couldn't get over the fact that she would even think to do this in the first place. It really is a loop, and it's an obsessive loop. And it can be devastating. The final thing is that some regret it, right? Those who do survive and live, they regret the fact that they ever tried to attempt suicide, and that can lead to worsening depression and anxiety, a lack of trust in one's judgment and self. And so for people who have had failed suicide attempts, intensive psychotherapy is needed. The client that I just mentioned, I saw her 3 times a week at my discretion, 3 times a week, because she needed intense psychotherapy to deal with all the feelings that she had because of this failed suicide attempt. It is a traumatic experience, and that's why I'm incorporating this into our topic of trauma, because it can be traumatizing. If you know somebody who has attempted suicide but failed, let me know in the comment section below. What has been your experience with this? Do you know anybody who talks about this, who has had this experience? I want to hear them, so let me know. If you have questions about that, feel free to post them in the comment section below. Thank you so much for visiting my channel today. I'm always glad to have you guys. If you are not subscribed, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you can stick around with me. We're going to continue our conversation about trauma. So I will see you on Wednesday with a bonus video. All right. Bye-bye, guys.